Great kings, devastating earthquakes, and a world made of water. It may surprise you to learn that the Bible got a lot of things right, and we've got the science to prove it. The Bible paints a very particular picture of Nazareth, the city in Israel where Jesus Christ reportedly lived. The biblical Nazareth was a Jewish community that held a particular distaste for the Romans. Archaeological digs in recent years support this idea, and may even have revealed the house where Jesus spent his early years. In an interview with Live Science, British professor Ken Dark discussed the recent discovery of a 1st century house beneath a place of worship called the Church of the Nutrition. 12th century crusaders had once supposedly worked on restoring the church after it experienced dilapidation. As it turned out, they also believed this house to have been the home of Mary and Joseph. For his part, Dark said, "Was this a house where Jesus grew up? It's impossible to say on archaeological grounds. On the other hand, there is no good archaeological reason why such an identification should be discounted." Meanwhile, other excavations have revealed evidence that people living in Bible-era Nazareth were completely opposed to the Romans and their culture. Based on a survey of the valley where Nazareth is, archaeologists found that the people living in the southern side, the area closer to Nazareth, had an equal amount of disdain for the Romans. In other words, archaeology backs up the Bible's statements that the area was full of pious Jews. Genesis 37 tells the story of Jacob, the Hebrew patriarch perhaps best known for his dream of a great ladder reaching to heaven. According to the Bible, the Israelites later followed Jacob into Egypt due to famine. While the story may not have unfolded exactly as told, there is concrete evidence for its historical context, given the presence of fellow Semitic speakers in Middle and New Kingdom Egypt. For starters, the worship of Yahweh, the God of Israel, is attested in Egypt at the correct time. During the time of Amenhotep III, there is a listing of people called the Shasu, which is just basically a catch-all term the Egyptians used for the descendant nomads of Sinai. Among them are the Shasu of Yahu. Scholars generally interpret Shasu of Yahu to be a tetragrammaton, the 4 Hebrew letters that make up God's name. That's right, Yahweh. Some of these Semitic nomads even governed Egypt at one point. Egyptian annals speak of the Hyksos, a mix of Semitic tribes who immigrated to Egypt during the Middle Kingdom period. Eventually, some of them managed to take over the northern part of the country and install themselves as pharaohs. These rulers all bore Semitic names, including one named Yakapar, a name resembling that of the biblical Jacob. This isn't necessarily the man himself, but it does line up to the scripture timeline. It is also possible that some of these people were enslaved following the Theban conquest of Lower Egypt, which leads right into the story of the Hebrews' enslavement. Speaking of such enslavement, the book of Exodus describes how the Israelites and Egyptians butted heads.
"Let my people go!"
Generally speaking, mainstream archaeologists put this sometime between 1400 BC and the time of Ramses II or Merneptah in the late 13th century BC. This is the only scientifically provable part of the story, however, as all similarities end in the Egyptian accounts of the conflict. The first ever mention of Israel by name occurs in a single line of Pharaoh Merneptah's victory stele, wherein Merneptah names the foreign lands he defeated. It reads, "Canaan has been plundered unto every sort of woe. Ashkelon has been overcome. Gezer has been captured. Yanoam is made non-existent. Israel is laid waste. His seed is no more." From this, the only things that can be said with certainty about Israel are the following. Israel was located in the Levant, and it was once defeated by Egypt. It's worth noting that Israel is labeled in hieroglyphics as a people. The rest of the places listed are lands. This supports the biblical narrative of Israel as a wandering people rather than a political entity, which came much later. That interpretation is not without its critics, though, with some saying that it must have been a scribal mistake. That said, this criticism lacks wider support, and most believe it is indeed likely that the scribe intended to write the word Israel. But without any further evidence, all that can be said with confidence is that a people called Israel most likely existed in the late Bronze Age. Jeremiah 47:4 says Israel's Philistine enemies were not Levantine natives, but the remnant of the coasts of Kaftor. Biblical scholars generally equate this region with the Greek island of Crete, although alternative proposals have suggested the region of southern Turkey. If Kaftor is indeed Crete, then recent genetic evidence has shown that Jeremiah got it broadly correct here. Near Eastern studies equate the Philistines to the people the Egyptians called the Peliset. These were one of the sea peoples who terrorized the ancient Near East, pirates and migrants from what we would basically call Europe today. Scholars argue that tough conditions in these western Mediterranean areas drove them east to seek greener pastures in the Levant. In 2013, scientists got a chance to test this theory when Israeli archaeologists discovered a Philistine cemetery near the city of Ashkelon.
In many ways, it's the culmination of 30 years of work trying to find the Philistines.
And their tests reaffirmed the traditional view on this. A study published in Science Advances found that individuals tested were a bit of an anomaly. Bodies from the late Bronze Age belonged to local Levantines. No surprise there. However, while remains from the more recent Iron Age were also mostly Levantine, they also carried genetic markers from Sardinia, Greece, and the Iberian Peninsula. So the DNA shows that Philistines are of European origin. Jeremiah's passage checks out. Warrior, hero, prophet, ruler, adulterer. In the Bible, the Israelite King David stands out as a larger-than-life figure. He helps his people fend off a Philistine invasion by killing the giant Goliath, and later captures Jerusalem from the Canaanites to establish the Israelite presence in what would become the Jewish holy city. Incredibly, however, despite his importance to the region's history and the Abrahamic world, scholars could find no extra-biblical traces of him, leading to doubts he had ever existed. All that changed when archaeologists discovered the first physical evidence for the existence of King David. An Aramaic stele discovered at Tel Dan in Syria recounts that the author, believed to be King Hazael of Damascus, defeated a handful of his enemies, including the Kingdom of Israel. He wrote, "I slew 70 kings who harnessed thousands of chariots and thousands of horsemen. I killed Jehoram, son of Ahab, king of Israel, and I killed Ahaziah, son of Jehoram, king of the house of David." Although the stele is fragmentary and both its date and translation are debated, the reference to the House of David is quite clear, suggesting that the writer seemed to believe King David was a real person and a scion of the dynasty of Israelite kings. In 2008, Professor Mario Korpel claimed to have confirmed that an ancient seal found in 1964 had once belonged to the Phoenician queen Jezebel. As the much-maligned wife of the Israelite king Ahab, Jezebel is criticized in the Bible for persecuting God's prophets and inserting her native Phoenician gods in the Hebrew gods' place. Kings 21:8 notes that she used seals such as the one Korpel analyzed. If that seal is in fact hers, it would confirm that she was very much committed to her native religion. The seal bears 4 Phoenician-style Aramaic letters that together read YZBL. Careful examination by Korpel determined that there is also a missing L, which would spell of, belonging to Jezebel. It is decorated with a handful of Egyptian symbols, including a winged sphinx, the ankh, serpents, and a falcon. Korpel argues that these symbols were historically associated with royalty who claimed divine or semi-divine status, hardly the kind of iconography that a Hebrew would use for her personal seal. In Phoenicia, the queen was considered the wife of the supreme god Baal, one of the Israelites' most hated adversaries. Jezebel's own name means "where is Baal," a likely reference to Phoenician mythology and the idea that a queen could make or break her husband's rule.
Throw him to the floor again, sir.
Oh, yes, throw him to the floor, please.
Little is known about Pontius Pilate, the man who oversaw Jesus' crucifixion. In fact, all that's actually known about him are the few details from the Bible, as well as his infamous cruelty, which was described in great detail by a whole host of ancient writers. To top it all off, there is no material evidence whatsoever that he was real until 1961. In the modern city of Caesarea, excavators discovered the marble slab fittingly known as the Pilate Stone. It provides precious little information, but it does fit the early imperial context and chronology of the Gospels. It says that Pilate reigned under the Emperor Tiberius, to whom the inscription is dedicated. So if Pilate were a contemporary of Tiberius, he would also have been a contemporary of Jesus Christ, and more significantly in this case, John the Baptist. John began his ministry in Tiberius' 15th year, according to Luke 3:1. Tiberius reigned from AD 14 to 37, meaning John the Baptist began preaching Jesus' coming around AD 29. There's little else to glean from the stone, which is heavily damaged, but at the very least, it certainly confirms that Pontius Pilate was real. Genesis 1:2 says that in the very beginning, earth was without form or shape, with darkness over the abyss and a mighty wind sweeping over the waters. This idea is by no means unique to Genesis. Egyptian mythology suggested that the world emerged from primordial waters of chaos. Although Genesis is scant on specific details of pre-creation Earth, one study suggests that the Bible's description of a watery world actually matches scientific evidence.
Surf's up, dude!
The study found that over 3 billion years ago, the concentration of oxygen-18 was much greater in the ocean of the Archaeozoic eon than in later times. This is a very sciencey way of saying that there was a lot more water back then, like maybe all water. It should be noted, however, that the two descriptions do not match 100%. The study authors noted that there probably were very small land masses. Boswell Wing told Tech Times, "I imagine a picture kind of like what it must look like to approach the Galapagos Islands from the west. Vast expanses of ocean waters to the north and south, with small volcanic rocky islets barely poking above the ocean surface." The The Bible claims that after Jesus' crucifixion, a great earthquake struck the land of Judea. Matthew 27:51-52 states, "The earth quaked, rocks were split, tombs were opened, and the bodies of many saints who had fallen asleep were raised." That earthquake is tricky to confirm scientifically. Early Christian tradition mentions an earthquake in Anatolia, noting that the Emperor Tiberius exempted a handful of damaged or destroyed cities from taxation, but we've got nothing in Judea. Despite the lack of textual evidence, geologists have identified seismic activity as having occurred around the time of the crucifixion. A 2012 study published in the International Geology Review found that a 6.3 magnitude earthquake hit Judea sometime during the time of Christ. However, dating earthquakes usually comes with a 5-year margin of error in either direction. So all that can be said for certain is that an earthquake occurred between AD 26 and AD 36, coinciding with the governorship of Pontius Pilate. And yes, indeed, lining up with the generally accepted timeline of Jesus. The study's authors noted that the earthquake would have been strong enough to cause some damage, but not so much that it would have made it into the historical record, which could explain why virtually no one, save for the Gospel of Matthew, reported it.